Welcome back everyone. So in this video, we are going to talk about verbosity in details with example. So let us begin. Just a sec. So before we dive into verbosity, first we need to understand the alternative of the system tasks provided by SV. And we have few alternatives in UVM. And it is always recommended to use those alternatives to print or to display any messages, whether it comes to the warning, the error, or you simply want to display the messages using the dollar display. So in this case, we have four different system tasks. So the first one is QVM info. The second one is UVM warning. Then we have UVM error. Then we have UVM fatal. So just remember, all the macros, since they are macros, you should avoid using the semicolon right after them, like you will do with the system verilog constructs, such as the system tasks like $display. So when compared to the system tasks, uh, this particular macros are better and they offer more flexibility and reusability because you have certain features like runtime modification. So you could just compile the code for a single time, and then later in the command line of, let's say, QuestaSIm, in the command line of QuestaSIm, you could just modify the functionality of each of these. You cannot do the same with the system task. And other than that, these offers more details and they are customizable from different level of hierarchy. Suppose let's take an example. Let's take an example of our UVM test bench of adder. So we have so this is the agent. Let's hop on to driver. So we have a UVM error in our driver, and we also have UVM info in our driver. So we can do modifications to the functionality of these macros from a different part of the hierarchy. Uh, let's say from the test module or from the environment module. So inside the build phase or end of elaboration or start of simulation phase, we can do some modifications to different levels of hierarchy. So it offers such kind of customization. And other than that, as I have already discussed, you can do the same during the runtime while writing the while running any command, or you could just do some modifications in your run.to file. So what are the differences between each four of these? So each four of these have two arguments, and except of UVM info, every one of these have two arguments, while UVM info has one extra argument. So the first argument is a string, and that argument is called ID. So ID print uh, will basically print. It is very convenient, and it will be printed as a sort of reference for you to recognize that this particular UVM info or any macro belongs to which particular class or which particular method of any class. So whatever you write here in the first argument, so when you will run the test bench or the UVM test bench, you will see something like this, that you will get the location of the source file, then some other stuff, then the the whole thing will start with an ID, and whatever you write inside that ID, it will be printed. right here inside this square bracket. So right now I have written ID. So you will just get ID. So for such a simple test bench, such as which I have mentioned or which I have designed for our adder, it is more convenient for you to use a certain method. So if you have watched my verification of adder using UVM test bench video, you will see that I am using get underscore type underscore name as a first argument. So what this argument does, it references to the name of the object or name of the class in which it is mentioned, and it will return the name of that particular class as a string. So let's say let's hop over to the sequence, and inside the sequence you can clearly see that I have used get type name. So what it will do, it will just check the name of the class. Here the name of the class is sequence1, so it will return sequence1 as a string. So our first argument only supports string data type, so this particular method fits perfectly. So what it will do, let's say here in our case, our the name of our test of our class is test underscore tv, and it extends UVM test. So whenever you will mention this get type name, it will just return the name of the class as a string. So what is the name of the class here? It is test underscore tb. So it will return test underscore tb. So this is more convenient for uh, certain macros which you are using, in which you want the ID to be as the same name to that of the class name. So it becomes really convenient. So after this, what is the second argument? The second argument is the most obvious one. It is the message you want to print from that macro or when that macro triggers. So you could write whatever you want. So you could take an example. You could take an example from my UVM test bench. Let's say inside the driver, you could see that the first argument I have used is get type name, which will return the name of the class as a string, and the name of the class here is driver. And then it will print the following message, and the message is following transaction is being sent to the DOT. So suppose if we write anything like sample string, so right after the ID, it will print that particular message. So this is the most easy to understand argument, the message you want to print. So just remember, both these first arguments are available for each of these macros. So after that, the only argument which remains is the verbosity. And this special argument is only available for the UVM info macro. It is not available for UVM warning, it is not available for UVM error, and it is not available for UVM fetter. And the main reason behind this is the severity. So in my upcoming lectures, I will talk about severity in more details, but just remember, uh, these three particular macros are very important. And when you encountered any of these, it simply implies that there is something wrong with your test bench. So you just want this particular message to get printed at any cost. It is because verbosity verbosity works as a filter about how much info you want to print on the transcript or on the console. So how it works as a filter mechanism, and it is a kind of, it follows a principle of threshold. So there are certain level of thresholds, and those thresholds are called verbosity. So depending upon the threshold set here in the UVM info, your UVM info message will get printed or not. So instead of blabbering all about the details, let's move on to the practical. So first, let's just take a note. So there are 5 of those thresholds. The very first one is UVM none, and UVM none has a value of 0, and it has the highest priority. So lesser the value, more the priority. So it has the highest priority. And if you select the third argument or the verbosity as UVM none, your message will get printed regardless of whatever threshold you have mentioned uh, in the different hierarchy or in the in your run.to file or in your command line. So this message will get printed at any cost, because mentioning UVM none as a verbosity means that this particular macro has the highest level of hierarchy, highest level of priority. Sorry. And by default, all the other macros have UVM none as their verbosity threshold. So for that reason, since they have UVM none as their default verbosity threshold, they will always get printed on your console. So first level is UVM none, and the second level is UVM low. And UVM low has a value of 100. So this is a certain filter. Then the next level is UVM medium, and it has a filter of 200. And by default, if you if you did not set any verbosity threshold, any default verbosity level, then this is the default threshold level. So how does it work? Let me explain it. Suppose uh, if your uh, if your verbosity is mentioned as UVM none for this particular macro, and you haven't modified the verbosity level later in the upper hierarchy or in the in the command, then all the macros which have a verbosity of 200 or less than 200 will get printed on the console. And other than that, if they have a verbosity higher than this threshold, let's say UVM high, which has a verbosity threshold of 300, UVM full, which has a verbosity threshold of 400, UVM debug, which has a verbosity threshold of 500. So let's say if I have mentioned the verbosity threshold to be UVM high, then this message will be filtered out and it will not get printed. Other than that, whatever you have mentioned inside the UVM warning, UVM error, or UVM fatal, they will definitely get printed because their verbosity is implicitly UVM none. So they will get printed anyways. But this time it will not get printed because I have mentioned the verbosity uh, of this particular macro to be UVM high. So what is the usage of this? So if you will remember, in system Verilog, we will use something called conditional code compilation, such as if-def, and then you will mention something, some task or some message you want to print inside that if-def block. And if during the during the runtime, during the simulation, if you did not mention that particular thing as an argument, that if-def block as an argument, then that particular part of the code will not get printed. And why will you do that? It is because to decrease the clutter. So you, for certain simulation runs, you do not want some certain time, certain type of display messages or tasks to be executed. It is just to decrease the clutter on your console. So the same functionality goes with the UVM info, and the difference is that it has that feature as an argument. So suppose if you want to print the value of a certain variable only when you want to debug uh, the uh, the the code or the environment, then only then you will just set the default verbosity to be higher to that which is mentioned inside your UVM info macro, so that your messages will get printed. So you have the power that later in the hierarchy or during the runtime, you could just filter certain messages, and you could decide what messages you want to print now or what you messages you want to print later, or what messages you don't want to print. So again, without any boring details, let's move on to the practical. So I have already declared a class which extend one of the component UVM test, and let's just comment this out for now. So for each component or objects, you need to first you need to do uh, the factory registration. After we are done with this, you need to call the constructor of the parent class implicitly. Let's name it test underscore tb, which is the name of this class. And the second argument for the constructor should be UVM component, which we will leave it null, as we will declare the hierarchy in the next level. And by the way, UVM test is the upmost hierarchy after UVM root. And inside this, let's call the formal arguments. Oops. UVM component is a data type in the UVM library, so we should write parent. So after we are done with our constructor, so let's move on to our main topic of the class. So let's just mention this inside the build phase. So I will write the build phase. So after this, let us just copy this particular message inside the build phase. And let's leave the first argument as it is, and it will just return the name of the class, and the name of the class is test underscore tb. So remember, both the first and second argument should be string, and this particular method returns the name of the class as a string. So the ID will be something like this: test underscore tb. So after this, uh, let's just move on to our second argument, and let's just say that I want to say I am inside the build phase of the UVM test. So it is just a silly message, and let's for our first simulation run, let's just set the verbosity level as UVM low. So as you can remember, we have 6 of these levels, and UVM low is the second highest priority, and by default our threshold is UVM medium. So as per our definition of whatever we have discussed till now, the macro with UVM low as a verbosity should get print on the console. So after this, we are pretty much done with our class, and let's just move on to the top level test module. And here you have to mention the name of the class as a string. So before opening the QuestaSIm, I will do some modifications. First of all, since this particular test underscore tb.sv file is in the same folder in which we have our uh, components and objects for the verification of error, and for that, if you will look at the top level file, the name of the module was top. So just during the simulation, when we will use the vsim command in QuestaSIm, it will not get confused with the top file of that header. We will do a little slight modification by calling it top one. And other than that, I think we should also include the main libraries. So first I will import UVM package, and I will do the wildcard import. And second thing is to include the macros svh file. After all, we are using macros. So these two things are essentials just to activate anything related to UVM. So yeah, okay. So we are done with this. So let's now just open the QuestaSIm. So right here in the command console, what I will do first, I will compile our SV file. And in this case, as you can see, the name of our SV file is test underscore tb.sv. So let's compile it by writing vlog space test underscore tb dot sv, and let's check whether I have made any typos. Okay, it is error free. So let's go ahead and run the simulation by writing vsim and then writing the module name of this top module, and the name is top 1. So hopping back to our code, right now we have mentioned where it is. Oh yeah. So we have mentioned the verbosity as UVM low, and UVM low is below the default threshold, so it should definitely print. So yeah, the simulation is run. So let's run the simulation by hitting run -all. I don't want to finish the console. So as you can see that we got the UVM report and we have 4 UVM infos. So out of this 4, the first 3 one are the default UVM info that will be executed by the UVM libraries, and these are not the user defined in our case. And the fourth one, you can see it right here, is our custom UVM info. So let's see how our whatever the stuff we wrote in the uh, inside the macro affected our message on the console. So let's just check whether we have transcript running on or not. Okay, let's just focus in this console. So you can see that the first thing it is writing UVM info, indicating that it is an UVM info macro. And the second thing is the line number and the file. So the file is test underscore tb.sv, which is true, and the line number is 14. And then the third thing is the timestamp. Since we haven't provided any delays and we are not using any run phase, the timestamp is 0. And then you can see that it is writing the hierarchy. So the UVM test component is called UVM underscore test underscore top. So that's why it is written right here. So after that, the uh, the the custom arguments that we have mentioned, the first and 3 arguments, can be seen right here. So as I have mentioned, that whatever you write in the ID will be written right here within the square bracket, and it is the case. So we are getting test underscore TB. Why is that? So I have already mentioned that when you will use the get underscore type underscore name as an as the first argument, it will print this, and this is just returning the name of the class in which the macro is located. So that's why we are getting test underscore TB. And then the second thing is the message that we put in the UVM info. Just to cross check, I did put I am inside the build phase of the UVM test. And you can see I am inside the build phase of the UVM test. So this is how UVM macro work. Now let's move on to the verbosity. So right now our verbosity is UVM low for this particular UVM macro. That's why this particular message got printed. So just to confirm uh, that whether we put the higher level of threshold, it will not get printed. I will do some modification, and also I will change this just to print a different thing. So let's say I just want to print UVM underscore test underscore top, and here uh, first I will try to print UVM medium. So I have changed the verbosity to UVM medium. Let's find out what will happen. And just for your information, again, UVM medium is the default verbosity threshold. So we need to compile the code again. So as you can see it right here that it did get print, and it is because we are still within the threshold, within the default threshold. So this is UVM desktop, our new ID, which I just provided by a custom string, and our message is still the same, and it is still getting printed. So let's move on to the next hierarchy, which is UVM high. And as I have mentioned, this is the default hierarchy. So as per the definition, this should not get printed. So let's change it to UVM high, and let's see what will happen. Let's compile it again. Now let's run the simulation. So as you can see that in the summary itself, we can see that right now we are only getting 3 of those default UVM info messages, which are provided by default from the whenever you run the UVM test bench. And other than that, we are not getting any messages. It is because we have mentioned the verbosity to be UVM high, and definitely it is definitely above the threshold, above the default threshold of UVM medium, which is 200. So by default, any message above those threshold will not get printed. So as you can see, even the name itself does make sense. So UVM debug. So why you want to use UVM debug? So whenever there is a UVM info message which is printing certain values inside a class, and you only want it to get printed when you are debugging, when you want more insights, more clutter on your console, then only you will change the default hierarchy using a certain method which I will discuss later in my upcoming class. So then only using that you will change the threshold to UVM debug, and then all the messages which you only want to print during the debugging phase will get printed. Since right now our default hierarchy, default threshold verbosity is uh, default, let's just write UVM debug, and again it will not get printed. Let's compile the code and let's run the simulation. As you can see it right here, that nowhere we are able to find our UVM info macro. It is because of the threshold. So this is the case of the UVM info, and the verbosity. It has a custom verbosity argument which can be used to set the filter for that particular UVM info macro. So what about the other macros? UVM warning, UVM error, and UVM fatal. So in upcoming videos, I will discuss more about it in details. So for let's now, for the context of verbosity, let's just also use this following one. So by default, UVM warning will not terminate simulation in any way, and but since the verbosity the verbosity argument is not available for either three of this, the UVM warning will get printed regardless of whatever the verbosity threshold is. It is because the default verbosity is UVM none. So let's just copy this and let's just say and here inside this UVM warning does not support the third argument, which is the verbosity level. So you could always imagine that there is a default argument implicitly, and that argument is UVM none. And UVM none is the lowest level of threshold. So even if you change the verbosity threshold later in the code or in the run during the runtime, you will still see this message getting printed, and it is because of the severity. This message is severe and important to get printed. So if you are getting UVM warning messages or UVM error or UVM fatal, then there is something wrong with your test bench. So that's why the default, the threshold or the priority of the remainder of three of the macros are high. So what will happen when we run UVM warning? It will not terminate the simulation. It will just print the message, very similar to UVM info, but it will get printed regardless of whatever the level or whatever the threshold of verbosity is set. So let's just go ahead and run and let's check what will happen with our report and other thing. So as you can see in the report that we have now one UVM warning macro activated, and you can see that we haven't mentioned any third argument because it does not support one, and you can see our message warning UVM test underscore top, which was our ID, and I am inside the build phase of the UVM test. So same goes with the remainder of the macros, that they will not have any third argument and they will get printed. The only difference is that UVM error will, just like UVM warning, will get printed, but it will just increment the error counter, which we will discuss in my upcoming videos, and it will show how many errors that you have received or how many UVM errors have been triggered. And you could just set the limit, that at what limit of the errors you receive, the simulation will get terminated. So I can set just after 5 UVM errors, the simulation should get terminated. And lastly, the UVM fatal. The UVM fatal will just straight up, wherever UVM fatal is encountered, it will straight up terminate the entire simulation run. So we will discuss more about the system, the macros details in my upcoming lectures. For now, the main motive of my video is to help you understand the basics of the verbosity thresholds. So I hope you find this video useful, and please stay tuned for my upcoming videos. Thank you so much.